The birth that shouldn't have been in the late autumn of 1856, in a modest farmhouse tucked into the cornfield-ribbed outskirts of Granville, Ohio, a woman named Clara Dunhill gave birth to triplets, an event that should have been celebrated. Triplets were a medical rarity in those times, often considered a stroke of both providence and peril. But this birth was unlike any the town physician, Dr. Thaddeus Grant, had ever seen. And it would mark the beginning of a quiet, unspoken mystery that would ripple through decades of local lore, medical journals, and whispered fears passed from one generation to the next. Clara was a 32-year-old housewife, stoic and practical, married to Elias Dunhill, a stern but respected blacksmith. They already had 2 children, ages 7 and 9, both boys with the stout arms and clear eyes typical of farm life. Nothing about Clara's previous pregnancies hinted at what was to come. There was no family history of multiples, no exotic diet or medicine, and the pregnancy itself was difficult, but not unusual. When labor began late one stormy night, the midwife Martha Reeds was summoned in haste. As thunder rolled across the sky like an angry drum and rain beat against the paneled glass of the windows, Martha arrived soaked and shaking. What she found inside the bedroom was a woman in pain, yes, but also strangely silent, as if the agony had been muted by something deeper. It was just past midnight when the first child emerged. A girl, pale, silent, but breathing. The second followed minutes later, also a girl, eerily identical. That was when Dr. Grant, who had been called due to the complications, realized something was wrong. The 2 infants were indistinguishable, not merely in appearance, but in the strangest way he could not put into words. Their fingers curled the same way. Their eyes fluttered at the same beat. He felt as though he were watching not 2 lives, but one duplicated. Then came the third. This child did not cry. She was limp at first, her skin bluish and cold, and yet alive. Dr. Grant described her as bearing the most unnatural calm I have ever seen in an infant. But she breathed, eventually blinked, and soon showed every sign of life. 3 girls, absolutely identical. And yet none of the girls bore a single birthmark, scar, or even freckle to distinguish them. Triplets, of course, were known, but monozygotic, or identical triplets, were so vanishingly rare in 1856 that it was almost unheard of. Most physicians at the time had never seen one pair of identical twins, let alone 3 indistinguishable sisters, born of a single mother with no fertility treatment or medical explanation. Word spread through Granville by breakfast. The Dunhills, normally private people, were bombarded with curious neighbors, ministers with Bible verses about signs and omens, and even traveling medicine men offering to examine the girls. The Dunhills refused them all. Clara, exhausted and weak from blood loss, insisted on keeping the girls from public view. "We'll raise them quiet," Elias reportedly told the pastor, "and keep to ourselves." And for a time that's what they did, but it didn't stop the gossip. People in town began to speak of strange sightings. The 3 girls growing in tandem were never seen apart. Not once. If one fell and scraped her knee, the other 2 would wince and clutch their legs as if they too were hurt. If one was punished or scolded, the others would cry in unison. At the age of 2, they began to speak not with clumsy toddler sounds, but with eerie synchronization. Not in unison, but by completing one another's sentences, like a 3-headed mind trapped in different bodies. No one had ever taught them this. By age 4, they could read despite no formal instruction. They could write simple letters, sing church hymns word for word, and even recite scriptures far beyond what their older brothers had learned. Dr. Grant, ever the curious man of science, asked to observe them privately. Clara allowed it, reluctantly. His notes, found later in a leather-bound diary now stored in the Ohio Historical Society's vault, reveal a troubling detail. "They know things," he wrote. "Not just recitations or mimicry. The way they look at you, It's like being dissected. I asked the middle one, Analyze, how she knew what I was thinking. She smiled and said, because you think loud. It wasn't merely uncanny intelligence. It was the way they seemed to exist in a shared consciousness interwoven, not only in behavior, but in experience. When one was burned by a candle at age 5, all three screamed, and all three bore the red welt mark on their hand. Clara, by then frail and nearly bedridden, stopped allowing them to play outdoors. The family grew increasingly reclusive. In 1861, when the Civil War broke out, Elias sent his 2 sons to a relative in Columbus for safety, fearing the war would come close to their region. He did not send the girls. It was around this time that tragedy struck. One of the triplets, Emily, was found unconscious in her bed, breathing but unresponsive. Dr. Grant was called again. He examined her thoroughly but could find no illness, no wound, no cause. She lay still, eyes open but blank. And the other 2? They fell into silence, refusing to eat, refusing to speak. For 72 hours, the farmhouse was deathly still. Then on the 4th morning, Emily sat up in her bed, looked around and spoke a single word. 1. No one understood what she meant. But the sisters began behaving differently. They no longer completed each other's sentences. They stopped singing. They stopped smiling. Dr. Grant began to suspect something impossible. That the girls shared not just thoughts, but life itself, that somehow they were 3 vessels for a single entity, and whatever had occurred that night, he feared it had tipped the balance. He wrote again in his diary, something's missing in them now, or perhaps something's been split. By 1862, the family had vanished from public life completely. Elias closed his forge. The girls were not seen at church or market. It was as if the Dunhills had disappeared into the fog of the fields surrounding their home. That is, until the census take arrived the following year. And what he recorded in his ledger is what historians still puzzle over to this day. According to the 1863 Granville census, the Dunhill household was occupied by 3 minor females, approximately age 7, all identical in appearance. No adult present. Claimed birth date, same. Claimed name, Clara. There was no record of Clara Dunhill's death, no burial, no tombstone. Only the name, written thrice, beside each of the girls' ages, Clara. Granville's 1863 census entry might have been dismissed as a clerical error. After all, mistakes were not uncommon in handwritten ledgers, but this entry sparked more questions than answers. The town registrar, a devout Methodist named Obadiah Lunt, had known the Dunhill family personally. When he saw the census listing, 3 identical girls, all claiming the name Clara, he assumed someone had tampered with the record. But when he visited the Dunhill farm to correct it, what he encountered made him leave the property without ever asking a question. The house, he later wrote in a note to the township council, smelled of vinegar, beeswax, and something very faintly like lavender and sickness. The shutters were closed, and only 1 lantern burned in the front room window. He knocked, once, twice. Then a voice from behind the door called out, in perfect unison, "We are Clara, we are fine." Obadiah never opened the door. He simply left the form as it was, 3 girls, all named Clara, and never returned. For nearly 6 years, nothing changed. The Dunhill farmhouse stood as a silent sentinel to whatever mystery festered inside. No one came or went. Milk deliveries were left at the gate and returned empty the next day. No schooling was provided, no church visits. It was as if time had slowed within the boundaries of the family's cornfield-lined land. Only 1 person ever claimed to have seen them up close during that period. A vagrant Civil War deserter named Caleb Moss, who sought shelter in one of the barns during the bitter winter of 1865. He stayed 3 nights, too weak with fever to flee. Afterward, he told a constable in Newark what he saw. There weren't no mother, he said. Only 3 girls looked the same. They didn't speak unless they all did. They watched me while I slept. One came and gave me broth and tucked me in, but she said nothing. They moved like shadows in water. I thought maybe I died and was waiting for angels to come. Moss died 2 months later of pneumonia, but his account became part of local legend, passed from one tavern to another, gaining details like moss on stone. The people of Granville began to call them the Clara Triplets. No one knew which was which. They were just Clara, always Clara. And then came the fire. On March 3, 1869, smoke was seen rising from the Dunhill farmstead. Neighbors rushed toward it, but when they arrived, they found no flames, only smoldering walls and a cold, collapsed roof. The barn had not been touched, nor the well. But the main house was gone. Within the ruins, searchers found 3 child-sized beds, still partially intact, a burnt cradle, and in the soot-covered remains of the parlor, they discovered 3 small dresses immaculately preserved, as if folded the night before. Nothing else. No bodies. No signs of struggle. No explanation. But strangest of all, carved in the scorched floorboards near the hearthstone were the words, "We are one. We are 3. We return to Earth." The coroner's office ruled the event an accident, though privately admitted no remains had been found. The record of the Clara Triplets quietly closed. Yet, the story did not end there. The second appearance 1883. 14 years after the fire, in a town over 60 miles away called Circleville, Ohio, a schoolteacher named Eleanor Wicks filed a report with the Board of Education. She claimed that 3 girls had appeared on her school steps one morning in May, asking to be enrolled. They looked to be around 12 or 13 years old, but spoke with perfect enunciation, advanced vocabulary, and bore an unsettling familiarity to one another. "I assumed they were triplets," Wicks wrote. But the application form startled me. Under name, all 3 wrote only Clara. They refused to provide parents' names, no address. When asked about their background, one replied, "We have come back to learn again." They were placed into the school for 1 week. During that week, they astounded faculty with their intellect, but disturbed classmates by staring too long, speaking without moving lips, and completing entire math problems simultaneously, as though sharing a single brain. On the 8th day, they vanished. Their desks were empty when school opened. Their papers remained, with a message scrawled on the back of a spelling test. "Not yet. We are waiting still." Their brief reappearance made it into the local paper under the title, "The Wicks School Sisters." But within days the matter faded from public interest. No one claimed the girls. No one knew where they went. Medical interest minus 1907. By the early 20th century, medicine had evolved, and so had public curiosity. A neurologist from the University of Chicago, Dr. Edgar Calhoun, found the original diary of Dr. Thaddeus Grant and became obsessed with the Dunhill case. He published an article titled "The Collective Consciousness of Monozygotic Multiples," suggesting that under certain circumstances, identical triplets could develop a shared neurological network, what he called unified thought behavior. Paper was dismissed as pseudoscience, but it reached the desk of an archivist at the Ohio Historical Society, who began digging through census ledgers. She found the 1863 entry, the Moss account, the Circleville School report. She began to see a pattern. Her final entry in the research log, dated 1911, reads simply, "They keep returning. Every 20 to 30 years. Different towns. Same names, same eyes. Always Clara." Then she too disappeared. Her apartment was found, untouched, a kettle boiled dry on the stove. And on her desk, in the space where her research log had been, lay a note written in precise cursive, "We are not done." And that leads us to the modern question, were the Clara triplets real? Or were they something else entirely? Some echo? Some lingering anomaly in time, looping endlessly every few decades? Or were they just three very misunderstood, very human girls born into a time too superstitious to explain them? By the turn of the century, the legend of the Clara triplets had faded into the margins of Ohio folklore, just another chilling campfire story whispered in small towns and forgotten by history. But in 1956, exactly 100 years after their original birth, something happened in the quiet river town of Yellow Springs, Ohio, that would revive the mystery in a way even modern science could not dismiss. A rural nurse named Lillian Grant, a descendant of Dr. Thaddeus Grant, delivered a pair of twin girls to a woman named Evelyn Mercer. The delivery was straightforward. Aside from one oddity, Evelyn had been told throughout her pregnancy that she was carrying only one child. No ultrasound, no signs, no separate heartbeats. And yet, when the day came, there were two, identical. In every way dark-haired, gray-eyed, quiet, but something about them struck Nurse Lillian as familiar. The way they looked around the room in silence. The way their small fingers curled at the exact same angles. And most disturbingly, the way they locked eyes with her and without having been taught a word, whispered, "Are we still Clara?" Lillian was so unnerved that she documented the event in her private journal. She wrote, "They were not twins. Not in the way we understand it. They were halves of something else. Something that used to be three." And then she added a line that she underlined 3 times. "This is not over." The Mercer twins, later legally named Clara Ann and Clara Beth, would grow up under constant scrutiny from researchers, psychologists, and even paranormal investigators. They were placed in a boarding school under academic scholarships. While they displayed no outward supernatural behavior, their records show that they rarely spoke to anyone but each other, often using a form of nonverbal communication that faculty described as eerily effective. But at the age of 17, they vanished. They were last seen walking into the woods behind the old school grounds in the early hours of the morning. A maintenance worker claimed he saw them hand in hand, barefoot, wearing white nightgowns. He called out to them, and one of them turned and said, "We are just going to find her." Her, the third. The missing Clara. They were never seen again. An academic pursuit in the 1998. A doctoral candidate in psychology at Ohio State University named Megan Holloway stumbled upon a case study of the Mercer twins while researching group cognition. Intrigued, she tracked down the remnants of Nurse Lillian Grant's journal in the university archives and found not only the 1956 entry, but the original diaries of Dr. Thaddeus Grant, preserved for over a century. Megan became obsessed. She mapped out sightings of the girls using census records, school logs, and hospital birth certificates dating back to 1856. What she discovered startled her. Every 27 to 30 years, a new appearance. Always in Ohio. Always a set of girls born or appearing around the anniversary of the Dunhill triplets' birth. Sometimes 1. Sometimes 2. Occasionally 3. And always the name Clara appeared. In 2003, Holloway published a dissertation titled Echoes of Identity, repeating anomalies in monozygotic presentation across generations. It was promptly rejected by the board, dismissed as speculative nonsense. She left academia shortly after, but just 1 year later, Megan was found in a small cabin near Hocking Hills, living off-grid. A local librarian reported that she came into town once a month to check out medical books and philosophy texts. When asked about her research, she simply said, "They're not done yet. They've just changed their names." The last known Clara. 2013, in a quiet suburb of Akron, Ohio, a girl named Claire Dunhill made headlines for a medical mystery. At age 8, she began showing inexplicable symptoms. Bruises that appeared overnight, fevers that came and went with no pattern, and strange Dreams she described to doctors as walking through someone else's house with two girls who wore my face. Genetic testing revealed something stunning. Claire Dunhill had 3 sets of identical mitochondrial markers. This defied known science. Mitochondrial DNA is passed from the mother only and always replicates identically. To have 3 variations of it, yet all identical in structure, was not just statistically impossible. It was biologically inexplicable. One geneticist wrote in his report, "This isn't mutation. This is repetition. And repetition doesn't happen in nature like this." Claire's case remains unresolved. She has since vanished, along with her parents. The only thing left behind in their Akron home was a hand-drawn picture found tacked to the back of her bedroom door. It showed 3 girls standing under a tree. All wore the same dress. All had the same face. Beneath it, written in a child's careful handwriting, "We are 3 again. The time is almost right." Reflection. How do we understand the unexplainable? So where does that leave us? The Clara triplets, if we believe the full scope of the documentation, were born in 1856, and yet their presence seems to linger well into the 21st century. Is it coincidence? A generational psychological imprint? A case of shared trauma? Or something older, something stranger? And perhaps the more important question isn't how they existed, but why they keep returning. Did they represent something, a message we're too preoccupied to hear? Were they nature's anomaly or a crack in the order of things? Or maybe there's something we still don't understand about identity, consciousness, and the boundaries of human life. As one researcher put it, the Clara case isn't about girls. It's about echoes. And echoes, if you listen long enough, never truly go away. London, 1894. It was the kind of fog-soaked spring that made the gas lamps flicker even at midday. In a tucked-away alley called Winchcombe Lane, wedged between Holborn and Clerkenwell, stood a narrow brick shop that most pedestrians overlooked. It bore no signboard, just a frosted window with an engraving, "A Ellery Horoogi Ista." Inside, amid a maze of ticking brass and mahogany, gears the size of teacups, and clocks stacked floor to ceiling, lived a man that London quietly forgot. Not a recluse by intention, but by habit. His name was Alden Ellery, and for over 20 years, he built timepieces that defied explanation. His clocks were unlike any others. Not merely precise, they were too precise. Local watchmakers said Ellery's creations were unnerving in their silence, ticking with a rhythm more akin to breathing than machinery. Timekeepers from the Royal Observatory reportedly visited once to study his handiwork and left without comment. Ellery himself? A tall, stooped man in his late 50s, he wore the same charcoal waistcoat every day, his fingers always stained with oil and soot. He spoke rarely and kept no apprentices. He had no family, no published work, and no correspondence in the scientific circles of the day. And yet, he claimed to be working on something no horologist in Britain or anywhere had dared to propose. A machine to reverse time. The first whisper of madness, the rumor didn't start in newspapers or lecture halls, but in the notebook of a young post clerk named Edwin Marlowe. He had been tasked with delivering a series of obscure parcels to Ellery's shop. After the 3rd delivery, curiosity overcame caution, and Edwin asked the clockmaker what all the unusual instruments were for. Ellery had looked up from his bench, monocle perched on one eye, and simply said, "To measure what cannot be measured, not just time, but its direction." Edwin wrote about the exchange in a letter to his cousin, later preserved in the British Postal Archive. He says he can make time flow backward, not just halt it, but retreat. He believes moments have shape and weight, and that they can be unspooled. For most, this was dismissed as the ramblings of a man too long surrounded by ticking things. But the truth was that Ellery had been quietly submitting his designs drawings of horrors, pendulums suspended in vacuum chambers, and crystals arranged in Fibonacci spirals to the Royal Society since 1887. Each was rejected without reply. But one physicist, an under-archivist named Frederick Baird, did respond privately. Baird had seen something familiar in Ellery's diagrams. Not in the theoretical physics of the time, but in the speculative writings of German mathematician Hermann Minkowski, who postulated that time was not linear, but part of a four-dimensional space-time structure. Ellery, it seemed, was trying to fold that structure. Baird met with him twice in the spring of 1893. He later wrote in his diary, "Ellery is not mad. He is terrifyingly sane. He believes time is not a river, but a hallway with doors, some locked, some not. He claims to have opened one for a few seconds. He would not tell me what he saw. The pocket watch that ran backward, what reignited public interest in Ellery came from an entirely unexpected place, a pawnshop in Southwark. In November of 1893, a watch was brought in by a former railway porter. It was unlike any other, gold-rimmed, smooth as bone, and with numbers arranged in reverse. The second hand ticked counterclockwise. The porter claimed he'd found it in an abandoned satchel on a train. Thinking it was broken, he tried to wind it, but the watch refused to stop ticking, in reverse. Stranger still, it told perfect time, but 1 hour behind. Every hour, it would lose exactly 60 minutes. A science reporter from the Pall Mall Gazette picked up the story and traced the timepiece back to its likely origin, the shop of Alden Ellery. The article, published on February 12, 1894, was titled, "The Clockmaker Who Unwinds the Hours." For the first time in his life, Ellery's shop saw visitors. Some were fascinated. Others ridiculed him. But he accepted neither praise nor insult. He merely sat behind the counter, polishing a set of glass spheres and adjusting an instrument that looked like a compass fused with a tuning fork. When asked directly about the backward watch, he replied, "That was a prototype. It did not do what I wanted. It only fooled the hands. I want to fool the moment." The final blueprint. By March of 1894, Ellery stopped accepting commissions. He boarded up the front of his shop and turned away even curious scholars. A neighbor recalled seeing unusual deliveries late at night, mirrors, liquid mercury, coal-powered dynamos, and something he swore looked like a coffin. Then, silence. On April 9th, a low humming noise was reported by half a dozen residents on Winchcombe Lane. The sound lasted for 6 minutes, described as like the groaning of a deep, distant bell. Then it stopped. When the constable arrived the next morning, he found the shop door open. Inside, nothing but quiet. Every clock had stopped. The pendulums were frozen. The air smelled faintly of ozone and burnt copper. Ellery was gone. No sign of struggle, no trace of movement. Only his coat draped over a chair, and on his workbench, a single sheet of parchment. The gears are ready. The pivot is fixed. Now to test the hinge. Alden Ellery's disappearance in April of 1894 was quietly registered with the local police. No public alert was issued. After all, the man had no family, no employees, no heirs. Only a shuttered shop, a scattered workshop, and a strange reputation. To most, he had simply slipped into obscurity, just another eccentric swallowed by London's endless grey. But not everyone was content with that explanation. One man in particular refused to believe it was ordinary. Frederick Baird, the physicist, who had once corresponded with Ellery, began a private investigation. In a series of now-lost letters, some later reconstructed from citations in academic footnotes, Baird described his visits to the shop, interviews with neighbors, and his troubling realization: Ellery had disassembled every conventional timepiece in the shop before disappearing. He didn't leave them broken, Baird noted. He neutralized them. He removed the principle of function. Gears misaligned. Springs disconnected. It was as though he no longer needed to measure time forward. In the center of Ellery's workshop stood a massive structure that had escaped public notice, a brass and glass contraption, roughly the size of a wardrobe, affixed with mirrored panels, pendulum suspended in glass tubes, and an armature shaped like a gyroscope. At the base was a copper plaque that read, Chronocycle Model 0, Witness to the Fold. The Fold Hypothesis. Frederick Baird's subsequent paper submitted privately to a short-lived scientific journal called Theoretical Mechanics Review in 1895, proposed a theory that would not be revisited seriously for almost a century. In it, he detailed what he called the time-fold hypothesis. Time, he suggested, was not a river nor a straight line, but a topological ribbon, one that could be folded, creased, or even looped if acted upon with sufficient force in the correct dimension. He believed Ellery had built a machine that could exploit a natural hinge point, a moment in time where cause and effect could theoretically be reversed, or at least bent. Baird included diagrams, most of which resemble modern ideas about closed time-like curve structures allowed under general relativity, though never practically demonstrated. He ended the paper with this line: if Ellery succeeded, he did not vanish. He simply stepped backward, not through a door, but through the seam of the moment itself. The journal shut down within a year. Baird was quietly forced into retirement. His papers disappeared from university archives, but Ellery's legend had only just begun. The Abbey Road account, 1921. In 1921, a caretaker at an abandoned music hall on Abbey Road made an odd discovery. Behind a false panel in the wall, he found a leather-bound notebook wrapped in oilcloth and sealed with brass clasps. Inside were pages filled with precise, looping handwriting. The entries were dated 1895, then 1894, then 1893, in reverse. The writer claimed to be A.E. and described sensations not unlike moving uphill through syrup, and moments repeating like stuttering breath. He referred to something called the 0 point, a state of complete temporal stillness. 1. Passage read, I believe I have made it through. The first attempt disoriented me. Time bled into itself. But with the pivot calibrated, I can witness an earlier hour. A minute reversed is harmless, an hour disorienting, a day dangerous. He described a failed experiment in which he found himself unable to distinguish between current events and those from the previous day. One chilling line read, I met myself, or someone who once was me. He did not recognize me. Or perhaps he did and chose not to admit it. This document was purchased by a private collector and disappeared from public record. But copies of the entries have surfaced in conspiracy forums and fringe scientific publications under the pseudonym The Ellery Diary. The 1950s interest and the Ministry file, following the rise of quantum theory in the mid-20th century. A British Ministry of Defense department known as DSIR, Department of Scientific and Industrial Research, re-examined certain historical anomalies. Among them was the Ellery event. Declassified in 2004, File 9-46B contains the following note from a 1957 investigation. Ellery's workshop represents a unique spatial-temporal anomaly. Electromagnetic field readings taken from the site in 1948 indicate residual distortion. No other known source of such distortion exists in pre-atomic era construction. The file suggests a possible experiment to replicate Ellery's design using modern components, but the project was shelved. A redacted segment reads, simultaneous events, internal clock desynchronization, cognitive drift reported by test subject, memory loop suspected. Whether this means they succeeded in replicating even a fraction of Ellery's work is unclear. But this is the last known government mention of the clockmaker's legacy. The modern Ellery Society today, a small group of hobbyists and amateur physicists, keep the legend alive. calling themselves the Ellery Society. They hold private conferences each decade in obscure locations, usually within a few miles of Winchcombe Lane. They claim to have rebuilt portions of the chronocycle using modern materials. Some say they have succeeded in minute phase reversal, but there is no hard evidence, only anecdote. And one cryptic claim made by the Society's founder, Madeline Cross, in a 1983 radio interview. He didn't want to reverse time to change the past. He wanted to visit it, to stand in it unobserved, like slipping behind a curtain in a theater and watching the actors before they notice. Which brings us to the enduring question, did Alden Ellery really reverse time? Or did he simply vanish into the margins of history, like so many forgotten inventors with wild ambition and no evidence? And perhaps more importantly, if you could step back into one moment, just once, would you? Even if it meant you might never return. In the final years of the 20th century, the world moved on from Alden Ellery. Or rather, it thought it had. Technology had outpaced even the wildest imaginings of 19th century scientists. We had split the atom, mapped the genome, and set satellites spinning around the Earth. Yet for all our forward motion, time remained a constant mystery. We measured it, obeyed it, feared its passing, but we could not alter it. Not meaningfully. And then, in 1994, on the exact centennial of Ellery's disappearance, something strange happened in a small museum in Kent. A curator at the East Surrey Horological Museum was cataloging an anonymous donation of antique timepieces. Among the crates, wrapped in felt and covered in dust, was an ornate clock with a brass plate that read simply, Ellery Witness Model No. 2. At first glance, it looked like a standard long case clock, tall, polished oak, intricate inlay. But the mechanism inside was unlike anything the museum staff had ever encountered. There were no gears, no winding mechanism. Just a chamber of nested rings, each one rotating silently, driven by magnetics no one could explain. And at the center, a small mirrored disc the size of a coin. Not reflective but absorptive, as though light itself hesitated at its surface. The most disturbing part? The clock never struck 12. It stopped at 11:59, reversed to 11:58, and began again, over and over and over. Museum staff recorded it, took it apart, and reassembled it. They ran diagnostics. Nothing explained the behavior. It was powered by a battery that showed zero depletion. The clock had no known manufacturer, no fingerprints, no serial number. After 3 months of study, the clock was quietly removed from public display. The official reason? Exposure to magnetic anomalies may pose a health risk to visitors. Unofficially, it was boxed up and transferred to a private collection. That was the last anyone heard of it. In 2001, a letter arrived at the office of a retired physics professor, Dr. Evelyn Morse, who had once written a short book about Alden Ellery for the University of Edinburgh. The letter was unsigned and postmarked from London, with no return address. Inside was a single page, typed in clean courier font. You are right. He did not vanish, he succeeded. Time, when folded carefully, will hide its seams. We do not walk through it as through a hallway. We move around its corners without knowing it. There is no future, no past, only the bend. It was unsigned. Dr. Morse, then 82, passed away the following year. Among her private papers was an annotated manuscript for a book she never published. The working title, The Man Who Slipped Through the Minute Hand. On the last page, she had scrawled in pencil, "What if he's been watching us all along?" Alden Ellery's name never appeared in schoolbooks. He was never honored with a plaque or statue. There is no record of his birth or death in official government registries, though census data places him on Winchcombe Lane in 1881. All that remains are fragments. The reversed pocket watch that still ticks, the blueprints no physicist can replicate, the reports of clocks running backward, briefly, Before self-correcting. The missing time recorded on old security tapes. 3 seconds gone here. 10 seconds looped there. Some say he succeeded in folding time and stepped through it. Others believe he failed and became trapped in a loop of his own making. But the most unsettling theory? That Ellery never left, that he's still here, watching, testing, waiting for the rest of us to realize that time isn't what we think. It is, that it doesn't only flow, it remembers. That it is aware of itself. As one Ellery Society member wrote anonymously, perhaps the reason we age is not that time moves forward, but that we are being pulled gently, imperceptibly back, toward the moment we were first born. And one day, if the fold is right, we'll arrive. The story of Alden Ellery is not about time travel in the romantic sense. It isn't about flying machines or epic journeys into the past. It's about curiosity. The unbearable need to understand. What lies behind the curtain? The silence between ticks. The moment just before midnight when everything might reverse. And maybe, just maybe, the realization that the past isn't behind us at all. It's waiting.